Hello and welcome into the KE Report. I'm your host, Shad Markwitz, and today we're getting an update from Erik Wetterling, also known as the Hedgeless Horseman. And we'll put a link to the Hedgeless Horseman down below so you can follow along with Erik's work. Erik, great to get you on the show as always. And this is an interesting one in that we were talking off mic about different jurisdictions and some of the different things that have happened in the U.S., and in particular, the recent executive order signed by the Trump administration just on March 20th. And this is kind of in combination with the Department of Defense and the Internal Development Finance Corp, where they're going to be focusing on critical minerals, focusing on loans, financing, and investment support for mining projects. And so this is on the mining side, the processing side, refining, but even on smelting. And they deal with not so much critical minerals in the sense of the green revolution and energy transition, but more strategic minerals that they believe are in threat of not being in supply, mostly minerals coming out of China, but they're including a lot of different minerals and a lot of different metals in here. And it seems like it's going to be a boon for U.S. companies. And there's already some initiatives to move along the permitting and less red tape. So when you're looking at the United States and looking at companies in the United States, anything jump out in your mind as far as companies that may be able to take advantage of this, or just a general thought on what this means for the U.S. as a jurisdiction?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's very interesting, as you said, that's not necessarily tied to the green revolution. I mean, you and I both know that some consider that to be a fad, that it's some aspects at least are not going to, let's say, work or are unsustainable in the long term. This seems more strategic, and I guess that's why they also included gold. And I don't think, those strategic metals, I mean, I don't think that's a fad, that, you need copper and nickel and gold from a monetary perspective. So that's one thing I think is really, really nice to see. And then also I consider it in the light of, okay, there was, I think, some executive act or something along those lines where it's like, okay, if a company invests $1 billion in the US, that they would kind of fast track the permitting of some projects, etc., which I would just assume could happen for mining projects as well. So it's like you have kind of maybe a multiplier effect there. And of course, I'm not an expert on the legislation and all that, so I don't know exactly how it's going to impact the mining sector in the US, but I've heard from people in the mining sector in the US, and they seem very excited. So this doesn't look like it's a castle of sand, that this actually has some teeth to it. So I mean, personally, I think any project, for example, where you can speed up the timeline, I mean, time is money. So who would be maybe benefiting the most? I mean, I would think maybe fairly large projects, and or especially maybe development projects where the permitting is the main kind of time sink. And Pierre Lassonde, not too long ago, called it the killing fields, basically the bottom of the Lassonde curve. So if this can get some momentum behind some projects, I think it's really, really good. I mean, one obvious I'm thinking about is Integra Resources, who's already a producer, but also have two even larger projects in the kind of development pipeline, and especially I would say their biggest and foremost flagship project, which is De La Mar, which like 100% of the focus there right now is permitting in Idaho. So if this has some teeth and that can get expedited, for example, I mean, who knows what kind of value add that could be. I mean, it's a very large project, and if you add or you subtract 1 year of permitting or something like that, I mean, that could be quite a sum of money, and I think that might also help get the flow of funds going, let's say, because they're looking at this and seeing that, hey, I mean, these projects are probably going to have a much easier time going forward. And then there's other like large, more early stage project, perhaps, was like Stillwater Critical Minerals. As the name suggests, they have a bunch of critical minerals, and it's a very, very large project, and that's why Glencore is involved, for example. So, I mean, I'm hoping that this can really shine the light of some of these large US-focused exploration or development projects.
Yeah, it's interesting because they specifically named gold in this, but they haven't named copper yet. But gold is considered one of these strategic minerals and critical minerals that they're looking at, along with things like uranium or potash for fertilizers, but a lot of the normal critical minerals and some of the specialty metals that you would think of. So something like the Stillwater Critical Minerals, their project in Montana seems like a no-brainer for this. I know they're already looking at government money, but to bring gold in the equation seems strange to me because a lot of countries haven't named gold as critical or strategic. So when you bring up Integra and the Delamar project or even their Nevada North project, both of those, if you could speed up the permitting, it'd be a big boon for them. But also if there's some money available, it's unclear here, and I don't know if people are quite clear with the initiative. They have funding potential in here, so maybe there's some government money that could come out and help develop some of these projects. It also makes me think of Black Pine in Idaho that Liberty Gold has, but you had mentioned a couple off mic to me, Erik, that I wasn't even familiar with that are earlier stage, but BCM and K2 Goldfields, maybe just speak to their U.S. projects.
Yeah, BCM is early stage exploration story. They have Sergey, which is a world-renowned geologist, who was with the discovery team that discovered Oyu Tolgoi. So they might have they have a very large porphyry target. They've even had some pretty impressive hits already. They haven't found the potential high-grade core, let's say, but it's believed to have the potential to be a very large porphyry target. And that guy, Sergey, I think he knows something about that. And it's in Utah, I believe, which I think is ranked number one in the US from a jurisdictional standpoint. And that's before these acts, of course. And if that would become a discovery, I think that obviously would require, 1 billion plus in capex. So that actually, kind of saw some renewed interest. I don't know exactly if it's tied to this executive order, but last week there was some, pretty big buying. I've seen it trade down to like 5 cents or something because they don't really have any money to drill. So they're sitting there on all this potential and probably don't, like a lot of juniors, don't want to dilute or raise the money needed at these low of a price because the dilution is obviously significant in that case, and it's not that cheap to be exploring for porphyry. So, it looks to me that there is some interest coming in. It's like there's people reading this and figuring out what this could imply, and obviously for the major companies out there, the major mining companies, because let's face it, if they're after, multi-billion-dollar projects, for example, that's a huge difference if that can be in production in 10 years or 20 years, for example, and also if they get some, benefits from investing $1 billion plus. And then there's even, I'm not an expert on, how the state gets involved. It's like, how much this potentially overrides some state legislation, for example, because, okay, what other like known problematic child is there in the US? Well, that would be California, but they have some great geological potential as well. So it's like K2 Gold, for example, which I used to be more invested in some years ago. They have a few projects, but now it seems that they believe they've figured out or get to drill their Mojave project, which looks really good, had some really impressive historic, and I think some holes were actually drilled by K2, but that looks like a no-brainer exploration project, for example, but it has had the problem of being in California, so things took time. And there's some other Californian juniors which kind of get absolutely killed simply because that they're in California. So again, I can't tell anyone what the impact will be for when you go from state to state, let's say, but I think it's worth pondering what this could mean, and also maybe front run some additional interest, let's say, or the reviving of some projects that had the biggest problem being, let's say, permitting.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how this shakes out because, again, copper is not really part of this, but then there's an executive order from the Trump team, just some talk about copper from other countries, and we get a lot of it from Chile, from Canada, from other South American jurisdictions like Peru. And if that was have to be sourced domestically, you would think that would shine a light on Arizona, where there's quite a lot of copper, or also in Nevada, there's now copper. And even in Idaho, there's that copper belt now with the Hercules and Zeus nearby in the Idaho belt, which is now looking at copper. So I hope that copper is maybe clarified, but the fact that gold's involved means any gold project in the U.S. and even the uranium projects in the U.S., there's going to be, a light on the mining industry from both the tariff side and this executive order side, and focusing on the development of mineral projects and expediting the permitting. So it seems like there's a lot of good things in the U.S. As an investor, Erik, would that have you scan through U.S. companies of any commodity and just see, are there any other states, any other areas that you'd be interested in? Would you put a premium on a U.S. company right now or a priority on it, or does it not really affect it? Would you still be looking at Canada, Australia, everything else?
Yeah, I mean, it's always relative, of course. And I mean, who knows? Maybe there's, or, sooner or later, there's going to be a fat premium put on some U.S. juniors or projects that it's already accounting or discounting, maybe overly discounting the potential benefits of this. But I for sure think it plays a part, because especially if one thinks about, okay, what is actual value? I mean, you can have the world's best deposit or the biggest one. I'm thinking like, Pebble, for example, in the US. I mean, everybody knows that's a multi-billion dollar project. But I mean, if you can never recover the metals, then it's de facto worthless. So this obviously has some kind of impact on the risk-adjusted value of some of these projects. And I mean, in a time where, first of all, I think that's one big reason why the sector has struggled so much, is simply because the timelines have been dragged out. So everybody's been bored to death. But that obviously also is one of the reasons why we're talking about, the coming shortage of a copper supply, for example, because we haven't been able to fill the pipeline. And even if this goes, even if it's good as some people say, it's not going to fill the pipeline immediately, obviously. But I would for sure think that, I'm ranking some US projects higher now. But that, obviously anything can change. And some people talk about, the tariffs on imports for steel, et cetera, that it could have an effect. There's like, well, the capex is going to go higher in the US. So it's not like I'm only looking at this and only buying US projects right now. But I think it for sure has impact. And I for sure think that the large mining companies, they're looking at this and thinking that, hey, I mean, if this speeds up the development of multi-billion dollar projects, even we saw JP Morgan take, I think, a 5% stake in Rio Tinto, and some people argue that, well, they're front running the fact that they believe that Resolution is going to get the go ahead. I have no idea, but it's like, who knows? This might be a pretty big deal for some large players.
Yeah, I've seen the scuttlebutt as well about both Pebble that Northern Dynasty has in Alaska. There's the Resolution mines that you mentioned, Trilogy Metals. There's a lot of these projects that have been held up in permitting hell, really, and they look like they were never going to move forward, even though they're very well endowed. And if some of these projects actually, these big projects start moving forward, that's really going to get things going. There's also the Hudbay Minerals, the Rosemont Copper Project, which has been on U.S. Forest Service land in Arizona, and that's been held up because of that. And if there's some coordination between the federal lands, the Forest Service lands, permitting, state and federal governments working together, if there's more coordination and we start seeing some of these projects get built, it would make sense that there's a premium on some of these U.S. projects now. But we'll just have to see how it shakes out, Erik. And any final thoughts that you have as far as people that are looking to invest in companies that could maybe get government grants or some of the government money to help fund it versus just diluting the shareholders with equity raises?
Well, it makes sense. If I was let's say largest shareholder, for example, of a junior, and I looked at my share price and let's say it's very, very low in relation to the potential value of a project, it's like, would I be really happy to dilute at low prices? No. And why is it low? Because people are seeing, it's like, well, they don't see any news releases yet, really, because there's no money being put in the ground, for example. And we know that most retail are chasing, they get rich tomorrow kind of stories. So, I think it for sure makes sense. Obviously, you're losing time at the same time if these potential grants take a long time, or if you don't get them at all. So that's what I don't envy about the the executives of some junior miners, for example, because like it's absolutely unknowable if you're absolutely doing the right decision, because you never know really what's going to happen in the future, and who knows, maybe you do get a grant, but you would have been better off actually diluting or something like that. So I mean, it's a tough spot, but it makes absolutely great sense, and it would obviously bring some signal value that there's a government agency out there that's like, okay, they have that project on the map, they're giving money to it. So I mean, then I think one would also assume that, well, in that case, if they're giving money to it, they're probably gonna help speed potential permitting up and stuff like that. So I think, I mean, it's obviously smart if you can get quote free money, for example. Why wouldn't you take it?
Yeah, I would love to see some more companies, especially some junior companies that are in the development stage, lock down some of that government grant money to help develop their project. Maybe not everything that they need to develop it, but just showing that the government's in line with the mining company, which bodes well for the permitting side as well. So we'll keep following along with the U.S. as a jurisdiction, some of these executive orders, how the tariffs play into this, and just more of a focus on extractive industry. So it should be a good thing overall for the sector. And we'll keep following along with companies that are able to utilize this, or maybe get a unique spin on things, or maybe get some of that funding. So until then, Erik, it's always great having you on the show. If people like getting Erik's thoughts, definitely go over and check out the Hedgeless Horseman website. We'll put a link to that down below this interview. Erik is always writing interesting things up as far as companies that are on his radar, or how he's looking at investing in the sector in a broad sense. Also puts out a lot of YouTube videos. So definitely click on the Hedgeless Horseman website. And Erik, as always, looking forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, in the same, Shad. Also note that I own shares of some of these companies, and I think some might be banner sponsors as well, so consider me biased.